Hello everyone, thank you for watching our live video today. We are very lucky to have with us Dr. Shing Cheng Tan from the National University of Malaysia, who will share some knowledge with us about the COVID-19 vaccine. Dr. Tan is a cancer researcher by profession, but during this pandemic period, he has been directly involved in the COVID-19 testing. He has also done some scientific analysis of the COVID-19 data and shared his findings with the scientific community since the early outbreak. So he's very well qualified to talk about this topic. So Dr. Tan, welcome and thank you for willingness to share some knowledge with us today.
Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to be here.
Dr. Tan, could you tell us what's a vaccine and how does it work to protect us from getting a disease?
A vaccine is a biological substance that is produced to mimic a real infection. But unlike a real infection, it is safe in the sense that it does not actually cause a disease. But when it is introduced into our body, it can still stimulate our immune system. So our immune system can produce antibodies against the infectious agent, like a virus in the case of COVID-19. So a vaccine actually teaches our body to recognize a so-called antigen, which is a virus, and trains our body to respond to it and to inactivate the virus quickly before it infects other cells in the body, thus giving us the immunity to the disease.
One of the most exciting news now is that numerous COVID-19 vaccines have been developed. Could you walk us through the different types of COVID-19 vaccines that are available so far?
There are actually more than 200 COVID-19 vaccines in different stages of development now, and about 50 to 60 of these are in the clinical phase. That is a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 that we frequently hear in the news. And among these, only 2 have received approval from the FDA so far, which are the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and also the Moderna vaccine. And apart from that, a few other vaccines which show great promise are the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, along with the Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines which have been approved for limited use in China, and also the Gamaleya vaccine of Russia, just to name a few.
What are the differences among these vaccines?
The principles behind these vaccines are different in the sense that they introduce different elements into our body to stimulate the immune system. So vaccines can actually be divided or be categorized into 4 major types. The first one is by using inactivated or weakened virus, which is the most traditional way of producing a vaccine. So this inactivated or weakened virus is not capable of causing a disease because the virus itself is too weak, but it can still generate an immune response and teach our body to recognize the virus. So if the same type of virus infects us again in the future, our immune system is already well prepared to act on it quickly. So the Sinovac and the Sinopharm vaccines, which I mentioned earlier, are developed based on this method. Another type of vaccine is a protein-based vaccine, which instead of using the whole virus, they use only the protein shell of the virus or the fragment of it. So in other words, all the potentially harmful components of a virus, like the RNA, are removed so as to safely stimulate our immune system. In fact, inactivated or weakened virus is already safe enough. But this protein-based vaccine takes a step further to remove all the potentially harmful components. So an example of this is a Novavax vaccine, which also shows great promise against COVID-19. The third type of vaccine is a viral vector vaccine, which uses a virus, not the coronavirus, but another type of virus that has been genetically engineered to reduce the pathogenicity. So it is capable of causing, capable of triggering the immune response, but not capable of causing a disease. So we also modify this virus to make it carry some coronavirus genes and let it enter our body and infect ourselves. So this type of infection, like I mentioned, is harmless because both the virus and the coronavirus genes have been genetically modified to make it not pathogenic. So the viral vector vaccine closely mimic the natural coronavirus infection and can therefore trigger a strong immune response. And an example of this is the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which I mentioned earlier. And the final type of vaccine is the nucleic acid vaccine, which also includes the mRNA vaccine that is very widely talked about nowadays, because both FDA-approved vaccines, the Pfizer-BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines, are mRNA vaccines. So this is actually a very new technology or a cutting-edge approach to transfer genetically engineered mRNA fragments into our cells to use the cellular machineries in our bodies to produce a harmless portion of the coronavirus, which will trigger an immune response. So these are how the vaccines are different from one another.
Okay, thank you for the very detailed explanation. Dr. Tan, one of the questions that many people are wondering is that vaccine production usually takes many years to complete, but this COVID-19 vaccine is produced within a very short time frame. How is this possible? And if the vaccine production is rushed, is the safety compromised?
That's a very good question. There are many reasons why the COVID-19 vaccine can be developed so quickly. The first one is because we are not starting from scratch. We have known a great deal about the coronavirus since the first SARS outbreak in 2003. That is about 17 years ago. And this new coronavirus, we call it SARS-CoV-2 or SARS coronavirus 2, is actually from the same family of the virus. So they are very closely related. So scientists already known for the very long time that the spike protein of the virus is a target for vaccine development. So when the new virus emerged, we didn't have to spend a lot of time looking for the target. We already had a candidate in mind, so we just tested it and found that the spike protein is indeed a great target. So this actually saves us a lot of time. And similarly, vaccine production technology is also not starting from scratch. We have already done a lot of groundwork to develop coronavirus vaccines since long time ago. For example, after the MERS outbreak in 2012 or 2013, researchers in Oxford have already started a viral vector for use as a vaccine in future coronavirus outbreaks. So they have been waiting for it. So when the COVID-19 emerged, they knew that this is a time to use the new technology. And they start to appropriately modify the vaccine and test for it. And another reason why the COVID-19 vaccine can be developed so quickly is because the genome sequencing technology is very matured nowadays. And the information sharing is also very fast. So within 1 week or around 10 days after the disease was initially identified as an outbreak, the Chinese scientists had already obtained the full genome sequence of the coronavirus and shared it with the scientific community all over the world. So by using this information, scientists were able to have a very deep understanding of the virus. So we know what protein it makes and how these proteins are organized. And also because the impact of COVID-19 is so unprecedented, funders and governments all over the world are injecting a lot of money to tackle the disease. And this is extremely important because without money, we are talking about billions of USD here. Without money, we really cannot do anything. And the regulatory agencies also play a very important role in accelerating the process of evaluating the safety data because traditionally, manufacturers usually wait until they have all the data before they submit the application to get approval from the regulatory agencies. But the approval process is very fast now because information is released to the regulators as it was acquired. So there's also a very strong public desire to help because vaccines need to go through several phases of clinical trials before they can be approved. And these phases usually involve tens of thousands of participants. So it normally takes many months or even years to recruit sufficient number of participants for a clinical trial. But in the case of COVID-19, it is within a few days. And the different phases of clinical trials are done back to back and sometimes even overlapping with one another. So no time is being wasted here. And these are why the COVID-19 vaccine can be developed so quickly.
But is it safe to use the vaccine? Because there have been reports that health workers in the UK suffered from severe allergic reaction after receiving the vaccine. And some countries also suspended the trial for some COVID-19 vaccines.
Yeah, I think you asked me about the vaccine safety just now, but I have not answered it. So as I mentioned, vaccine development is quick, but it is not overrushed at all. So all the vaccines either have gone through or are going through all the necessary phases of clinical trials. So in the news, we always heard of phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. So each of the phases has a different question to answer. But one of the most important questions in all phases is whether the vaccine is safe. So this is the most important part. So safety is not compromised in any way, and the vaccine is very safe to use. So about the examples that you mentioned, first is the health workers from the UK. So these health workers actually had a significant history of allergic reactions to the extent that they carry their adrenaline auto-injectors with them all the time. So it is not like the vaccine caused a normal healthy individual to develop severe allergy, but rather they already had this very severe pre-existing allergic condition and the vaccine triggered it. And in fact, a similar incident also happened in the US where 6 people developed severe allergy after vaccination. And among these, we know one of them had a medical history of severe allergy as well. The other 5 people, the last time I read about this news about 2 weeks ago, we still didn't know whether they have this medical history or not. It could be yes, it could be no. I'm not sure whether there's any update on that. But now, as a safety precaution, the Pfizer vaccine is not recommended for people with pre-existing allergy. But for individuals without allergy, the vaccine is very safe. So as a matter of fact, many countries have begun the vaccination programs and millions of people have already been vaccinated. And the number of people developing any adverse reaction is something that can be counted on fingers. And about the suspension of the vaccine trial, actually a pause in a clinical trial is not unusual, not only in vaccine trials, but in all types of trial. So whenever someone develops an adverse reaction, ethically we have to pause the trial to find out whether the adverse reaction is associated with the intervention or not. So for the COVID-19 vaccine, as far as I'm concerned, there have been 3 instances of trial suspension. One in the UK, one in Brazil, and one in Peru. So the one in the UK and Brazil have already ruled out the vaccine as a cause of the adverse reaction and have already resumed the trials. Whereas the one in Peru is still under investigation, but it is a pause at the current stage, not a permanent suspension.
That's a very clear explanation. So is it safe to assume that the vaccine will not cause any side effects?
No, that is not true. Side effect and safety or adverse reaction are 2 different concepts. So side effects are basically the minor ones which are not harmful to you. For example, pain at the site of injection, or fatigue, or headache, or even fever. So data from the Pfizer-BioNTech trials indicate that about 15% of people receiving the vaccine would develop side effects like the ones I mentioned just now. So these side effects usually subside within a few hours or within a few days. So these side effects indicate that your immune system is responding to the vaccine. So they are very common with all types of vaccinations, not only COVID-19 vaccine.
Thank you for the clarification. But Dr. Tan, you mentioned earlier that both the approved vaccines are mRNA vaccines, which is a new technology. Since it's a new technology, how can we be sure that it will not cause harm to us? I'm asking this because there have been some concerns that mRNA vaccine can modify our DNA.
All right, first of all, mRNA vaccines are new in the sense that they have not been licensed or approved before, but scientists have been studying it for decades, so we have a deep understanding of how it works. And we have also done several clinical trials using mRNA vaccines for diseases like influenza, Zika, and rabies since many years ago. And data from these clinical trials show that they are very safe. So mRNA vaccine is not something that is so new that we don't know much about it. In fact, we have known a great deal about it since many years ago. And regarding the concern that it can modify our DNA, it is not true because DNA and RNA are located in different compartments in the cell. So DNA is in the nucleus, and RNA or mRNA is in the cytoplasm. So the mRNA does not even have the opportunity to meet DNA, let alone modifying it. And mRNA is very short-lived. So after the cells use the instruction of the mRNA to produce antigens to stimulate the immune system, they destroy the mRNA. So this is a very precise process. There is no possibility that the mRNA will remain there for an extended period of time. So even if you assume the RNA can modify DNA, which is not true, the RNA will not live long enough to do so.
Okay, seems like the mRNA vaccine is a very safe vaccine, but are there any disadvantages of this mRNA technology?
I think the major disadvantage is on the storage and logistic because the mRNA itself is very fragile. So the vaccine needs to be stored at an ultra low temperature, which is about minus 70 or minus 80 degrees Celsius for Pfizer-BioNTech and minus 20 for the Moderna vaccine. So if we don't store at a low temperature, the vaccine or the mRNA can become degraded easily and lose its functions. And we have to maintain the same ultra low temperature throughout the entire distribution chain. That means from the manufacturing plant to the airport, and then to the national warehouse, further to the regional warehouse, and then to the clinics. So it can only be taught shortly before injection so as to ensure the maximal efficacy. So even in developed countries, maintaining an ultra low temperature throughout the entire distribution chain is quite difficult, especially for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine because it needs a temperature of about minus 70 or minus 80 degrees Celsius. So it can definitely pose a major challenge for countries or areas with limited ultra-low refrigeration facilities. But fortunately, in these regions, they can still use other types of vaccines, which I mentioned earlier. That's why some countries have already pre-ordered the Sinovac or Sinopharm vaccines, which contains an inactivated virus, or the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, which uses a viral vector. So these vaccines are more stable and can be stored at a slightly higher temperature, about 2 to 4 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature of a standard refrigerator. But for these vaccines, the disadvantage is that the phase 3 clinical trials have not been fully completed. But based on the currently available data, they appear to be highly effective and safe.
Just now, you mentioned that the Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored at minus 8 degrees Celsius, whereas the Moderna vaccine can be stored minus 20 degrees Celsius. Both these vaccines are mRNA vaccine. So why are the storage temperature different?
The two vaccines actually contain slightly different ingredients. So both these vaccines contain four things. The first is the mRNA, and then several types of lipid to encase the mRNA to protect it from degradation and to help it to slide inside the cell. And the third ingredient is salt, a few types of salt, which act as a pH buffer to ensure that the vaccine or the mRNA is not exposed to unsuitable pH. And finally is a sucrose, which acts as a cryoprotectant to prevent the vaccine from damage during freezing. So the major difference between these vaccines, when I say major difference, I mean in terms of storage temperature. So the major difference is the lipid used to protect the mRNA. So both the vaccines use different types of lipids at different concentrations and different ratios. And because of the complex chemical interaction among these lipids, we get the different storage temperature.
Talking about ingredients, there are some concern that the vaccine contain tissues from aborted fetus or animals, or even a microchip to track our movement. What's your comment on that?
This is not true at all. There is no fetal or animal tissue in the vaccine, and you can never put human or animal cells into the vaccine because it can cause an immune reaction or rejection that you don't want. So the claims that vaccine contain fetal tissue actually come from a misunderstanding about how vaccines are developed in general. Because in the lab, if you want to grow a virus, we need to grow them in the cell culture. And these cell cultures are derived from stem cells, not the fetus, but only the stem cell that are obtained from elective abortions like 60 or 70 years ago. And over the years, these cells have been reproduced again and again to provide a consistent genetic makeup for biomedical research. So not only research on vaccines, but all medical or biomedical research rely very heavily on these cell cultures. So if these cell cultures do not exist, the entire biomedical research is basically paralyzed. So it's not like we are going to collect fetuses and put them in our vaccine, but it's the stem cells that are derived from elective abortions since 60 or 70 years ago. And about the microchip claim, it is a result of cherry picking of information and perhaps overthinking by conspiracy theorists. So they put together many unrelated things and say as if this thing happens. But as a matter of fact, most of us, the harmless citizens with no power or no money, we are not worth to be tracked by the government. So if they really want to track us, perhaps our phone is a much better tracking device.
Thank you for the explanation. Recently, there have been reports that the COVID-19 virus has mutated. Does the vaccine still work when virus is mutated?
That's a good question. In fact, mutations have occurred many times, not only recently, but throughout the entire period of the pandemic. But a great majority of these mutations do not have impact on the transmissibility or other characteristics of the virus. That's why they are not widely reported in the news. So back to your question, yes, the vaccine will still work because the vaccines allow you to produce antibodies against many different regions in the spike protein. So we target the spike protein because it is the most important component that the virus needs to infect the human cells. So we don't target only one region of a spike protein, we target many different regions of the proteins. So it is unlikely that a single or a few mutations would make the vaccine less effective. And remember, we have many different vaccines. So they all target different regions of the viral genome. So in an unlikely situation that one vaccine has lost its efficacy due to the mutation in the virus, the other vaccines will still work. But one thing I would like to highlight is that over time, as more and more mutations occur and accumulate, then the vaccines will eventually slowly lose its efficacy and will need to be modified. But we expect this to happen after many years because compared to viruses like influenza, for example, the coronavirus is considered to have a very low mutation rate, which is a good thing for us because it gives us a longer time window for us to get rid of the virus. So if a lot of people develop immunity against the virus within a short period of time, then the virus will not survive long enough to mutate significantly and will be safe. But if a lot of people don't take vaccine, the duration of the pandemic will be prolonged, and the virus will have more time and opportunity to slowly accumulate the mutations to render the vaccines ineffective. So if this happens, then we have to start all over again.
So if we take the vaccine, how long will we have the immunity?
Currently, it is still unknown how long the immunity will last. But if you look at the data from the natural infection, if people are infected by the COVID-19 coronavirus, chances of reinfection are very low during the first 90 days. And there is also some preliminary evidence that the vaccine will give you a better protection than having had the virus. So I believe that the immunity will last for a much longer period than this. But the researchers are still collecting data on this. So there are a lot of possibilities. Like in some studies in the animal model, the mouse model, we found that the vaccine can provide immunity for up to 13 weeks in mice. That is in mice. So if you translate this duration to human, then it is equivalent to several years. But as I mentioned, we are still collecting the data. So at the present stage, we still don't know exactly whether we need to take this vaccine on a regular basis or take once and take another booster shot once in a few years, or whether we'll be immune for life after we take it once. So by taking it once, I mean a complete course of 2 doses. So researchers are still collecting data on this.
That's interesting. May I know why we need to take 2 doses instead of a single dose?
It actually depends on the vaccine. So some vaccines you only need to take 1 dose because 1 dose is enough to build up sufficient immunity. Some vaccines you need to take 3 doses, but for the great majority it is 2 doses. So the first dose serves to prime your immune system to the infection and create some short-term memory, but it does not provide enough or complete immunity. Only after you get the second dose, your immune system will develop long-term memory to the infection. So an analysis from the Pfizer BioNTech trials shows that if you take only 1 dose, the vaccine efficacy is only about 50%. But only when you take a second dose, the efficacy is increased to 95%. So then I think it is important to highlight that immunity conferred by the vaccine is not immediate. After you take the first dose, you only get a little immunity and you need to wait for another 3 to 4 weeks, depending on the vaccines, 3 to 4 weeks. Then only you take the second dose. And after that, only the immunity will slowly build up to the max over the next few weeks. So to achieve the 95% efficacy, you need to wait for 1 or 2 months after the first shot.
Dr. Tan, just now you also mentioned that when someone is infected with COVID-19, the possibility that he or she gets another infection is low in the first 90 days. Does this mean that people infected with COVID-19 have natural immunity against the disease? If yes, is there any difference in the immunity caused by a vaccine and the immunity caused by a natural infection?
Yes, people infected with the virus have some antibodies that can recognize the virus, so they have natural immunity against the disease. But as you also know, it's only 90 days. And like I mentioned earlier, although we don't know how long the vaccine immunity will last, it is very likely that it will last for a much longer period of time, probably several years. So there are also some evidence that tells us that the vaccine will give us a better protection compared to a natural infection. And in fact, some data also show that vaccine will protect us from developing a severe disease in case we are sick with COVID-19. So remember, the vaccine is not 100% effective. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine is only 95%, and other vaccines also are in the range of probably around 90%. So if you're among the unlucky ones who still get the disease even after vaccination, then at least the vaccine can protect you from developing a severe condition. And regarding the difference in immunity or the immune response caused by the vaccine and that caused by the natural infection, it also depends on the vaccine's use. But if you're talking about the mRNA vaccines like the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, then the vaccines target only specific components like the spike protein, whereas the natural infection creates the immune memory for the whole virus. So yes, there are differences, but it is important to mention that scientific evidence indicate that targeting specific components is already sufficient to prevent us from developing COVID-19. And current data also show that immunity from a natural infection is no better than immunity conferred by the vaccine. So at least if you take the vaccine, you will have the immunity without having to develop the disease.
So, if I understand you correctly, you mean even people who had been infected by the COVID-19 virus should take the vaccine?
Yes, you are right. But since they have about 90 days of immunity, some agencies recommend them to delay getting the vaccination first to allow more vulnerable individuals to be vaccinated first. Because in most countries, when the vaccines are, first arrive, it is most likely that the quantity will not be sufficient for the entire population. So priority should be given to the more vulnerable groups first.
Are there any individuals who should not take the vaccine?
So far, we know people with severe allergies should not take the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine for the time being because it can trigger the allergy attack. And if our suspicion of a causative factor is correct, then the Moderna vaccine also has the potential to trigger allergy. But so far, I don't think we have seen this happening yet. And other types of vaccines, we still don't have the full data yet, but probably they will be okay too. And apart from that, there are a few groups of individuals who I would not say should avoid taking the vaccine, but they should talk to their doctors to discuss the risks and benefits of getting the vaccines before making a decision. So this include pregnant women and also individuals below 16 years old and also immunocompromised people. So the reason why these groups need to be particularly cautious is because the vaccine trials did not include these groups. So the safety data is limited, although theoretically the risk of adverse reaction is very low. So anyway, it is important to make sure that anyone around these groups of individuals is vaccinated.
About individuals with severe allergy, why or how do the mRNA vaccine trigger their condition?
It is because of an ingredient. So earlier I told you that the mRNA vaccine contains 4 major ingredients, right? So the mRNA, the lipids, the salts, and the sucrose. So one of the lipids used in the formulation is chemically linked with PEG, polyethylene glycol. So PEG is a common compound used in many pharmaceutical products, and it is actually a very good agent for long-term stabilization of pharmaceutical products. So now we cannot be 100% sure that PEG is the culprit that triggers the allergic reaction, but we have reasons to suspect it to be the culprit because it is also found in many other drugs that have occasionally triggered severe allergy, but the exact mechanism is not fully understood at the time being.
Okay, Dr. Tan, another question that I have is, now we have more than one vaccine. Should we get just one type of vaccine or take multiple vaccines?
Theoretically, if we take multiple vaccines, we can train different subsets of our immune cells to respond to the virus. But the combination of more than one vaccine has not been fully tested yet. We don't know whether there will be some cross interaction between the vaccines that will lead to any undesired outcome. So for this reason, we should avoid taking more than one vaccine until more data is available. I think, if I remember correctly, the Oxford, AstraZeneca, and the Gamaleya vaccines are now working together to test the combination of their vaccines. So for this combination, we can expect safety data to be available in near future. But anyway, one vaccine is already 90 to 95% effective. So there is not really a need to take more than one vaccine.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. Another thing that many people are concerned is that they will be forced to take the vaccine and this will violate their human rights. What's your comment on that?
I think the government in many countries have already indicated that vaccinations will not be made mandatory, but rather it will be given on a voluntary basis. And also the WHO does not foresee any country to make it mandatory and encourages the countries to educate the people about the benefits of the benefits of vaccination and let the people make up their own mind. So the concerns that people will be forced to take the vaccine does not actually exist. So I agree with the WHO because I believe that education is very important because we already have an abundance of scientific data and evidence which have conclusively proved that the benefits of the vaccines greatly outweigh the risks. But unfortunately, some anti-vaxxers either they choose not to look at the scientific evidence or they do not understand the evidence. I mean, I'm trained in the field of evidence-based medicine, so I know that not all evidence are equal. Some evidence are better and more reliable than the others. So we have to appraise each of evidence using scientific method because some studies contain major flaws. So when we appraise the evidence carefully, we find that there is really no reason to reject vaccination unless you belong to the special groups which I mentioned earlier. So like individuals with severe allergic reaction, history, and the immunocompromised individuals. So we want to educate the people so that they know that if we choose to take the vaccine, we will be protecting both ourselves and the vulnerable groups. So it is a very right thing and very responsible thing to do.
Thank you, Dr. Tan. I have one last question. Do we need to continue wearing a mask, wash hands, and practice social distancing even after getting the vaccine?
Yes, we need to do so. There are a few reasons for this. First, remember the vaccine is already about 90 to 95% effective. So this is very high, but it also means that 5 to 10% of people can still get the disease even after vaccination. So it is important to continue practicing all these new normals until at least we achieve a so-called herd immunity. That means a point where the disease won't spread anymore when a large proportion of the population has become immune to the infection. But we can only achieve this herd immunity when a lot of people are vaccinated. So some researchers estimate the number to be as high as 70 to 90% for us to achieve the herd immunity. So it will take some time, probably 1 or 2 more years or even longer if a lot of people don't want to be vaccinated for whatever reasons. So another reason why we need to practice all these new normals is because, like I mentioned earlier, we still don't have a very concrete answer as to how long the immunity will last. So if unfortunately it will not last long enough until the pandemic ends, or if the virus has accumulated enough mutations to render the vaccine ineffective, then we are back to square one. So we need to continue practicing social distancing, keep personal hygiene, and also wear the face mask.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tan. I think this is a very informative session with you. Do you have any last words to our audience today?
Um, there are actually two things which I would like to reiterate. So the first is that we can only stop the pandemic when a large percentage of the population has become immune to the infection. It's either through vaccination or through natural infection. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, natural infection is a bad idea because immunity that you obtain from a natural infection is really no better than the immunity from a vaccination. And of course, a natural infection will make you sick. You will feel very terrible and even risk losing your life. So vaccination is of course the best option here. The second thing that I wish to say is that unless you belong to the special groups which I mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to take the vaccine. It is very safe and the benefits greatly outweigh the risk. So as a matter of fact, some diseases have been either fully eradicated or almost fully eradicated because of vaccination. And I think the safety trials are done in a much more stringent manner today compared to decades ago. So taking a vaccine is very safe and it's the right thing to do and also a very responsible thing to do because it protects not only you and your family but also the entire community.
All right, we have come to the end of our interview with Dr. Tan today. Thank you very much, Dr. Tan, and thank you to everyone who has watched our video today. I hope you have learned some useful information from the interview. Thank you again and stay safe.
Thank you very much and see you again.